Whenever there is a mention of heritage, old traditions, and customs, invariably two thought streams seem to emerge. One says, burn the old, throw it away, while the other says that old is gold. Do we have to choose between one or the other of these conflicting ideologies? Or is there a golden mean between the two? Can we create a constantly evolving, ever new culture? A culture that's created by weaving together the threads from the ancient wisdom and the pragmatism and new knowledge of today? That is what we attempt to do here. Hello, you are listening to the podcast Something Old, Something New, and I am your host, Rohini Abhyankar. Part 14, Tale of Vinata and Kadru and the Marshmallow Experiment. Before we begin today's story, I am going to address a question raised by some listeners after listening to the first half of Kadru Vinata's story in the last episode. So, what was the question and the comments? One person asked me very seriously, "What are you saying in the last episode? What do you mean they laid eggs? Weren't they women?" Another called me and said, "Man, my eyes widened as I listened again and again. But you actually did say that women laid eggs." So the question is, how could Vinata and Kadru lay eggs despite being humans? I will share here what makes sense to me, and you can form your own opinion. Let's step back a little, and by that I mean a few thousand years. The world was being created. Where did this creation come from? Now, there is an ongoing debate about evolution or intelligent design. Different religions present arguments about the universe's origin. For example, in some religions, it's said that God first created man, then the woman, and they were sent to earth due to eating the fruit of sin, and the world began. Puranas and Upanishads also have a theory of their own and offer explanations about how this living world came into existence. Those familiar with the Upanishads might mention the concept of an egg being laid in water from which the first living being emerged, giving rise to the next living beings and so on. But we won't delve into religious debates here. Let's consider this as a story. We are focusing on the narrative and exploring what we can learn from the stories from that time. In the second episode of the podcast, titled Sense Making of Stories, we did discuss how stories operate on different levels and help us learn. The takeaway here is that the creation of the universe remains a mystery. Even now, we lack definitive ways to understand how it precisely unfolded. While scientists propose new theories, testing them remains a challenge due to the lack of appropriate tools and means. Personally, I believe that the universe, as well as the way we know it, is created and all living beings originated from somewhere. In the beginning of the Mahabharata, that is in the Adi Parva, it's mentioned that there were Prajapatis and the word originated from them. It's an idea I have come to accept, which has allowed me to progress without getting caught up into the details of how Vinata and Kadru laid eggs despite being humans. Now, a little bit about sage Kashyap. Kashyap was among the many Prajapatis responsible for creating all living beings. It is said that he created sons and daughters through his mental prowess. That is, he had Manasaputra and Manasakanya, including Parvat, Narad, Arundhati, and Manasa. When exact explanations are challenging, theories like being born from the mind are often suggested. We do accept that the entire universe originated from the Big Bang, don't we? As there is no other viable option. Kashyap had multiple wives. Procreation was the primary goal. Some sources state that there were 21 wives, while others mention 31. Regardless, there were many. They were the daughters of Daksha, and then their names were Aditi, Diti, Kala, Danayus, Danu, Simhika, Krodha, Pritha, Vishwa, Vinata, Kapila, Muni, and Kadru. Aditi had 12 sons who were called Adityas. Kapila gave birth to cows, Gandharvas, Apsaras, Brahmins, and animals with two hoofs. From Diti came the Daityas, while Danu's descendants became demons, among others. The Puranas don't always agree on these details, but it's understood that all living creatures, from insects to ants and elephants, came into being from the Prajapatis. But as is true in most cases, Big Boss Vyasa has an intriguing story about how Garuda was born to sage Kashyap, and here is that story. When sage Kashyap desired children, he embarked on penance and organized a yajna, a ritual sacrifice. Recognizing the significance of having offsprings for the entire universe, the whole world rallied around him because he was a Prajapati, the creator. Even Indra joined in and asked sage Kashyap how he could assist. Kashyap instructed him to fetch the wood required for the yajna. Indra swiftly arrived with a heap of wooden logs on his shoulder. On his way, he came across tiny Valkylya sages, no bigger than thumbs, carrying a palasha leaf tree atop their heads as an offering for sage Kashyap's sacrifice. The sages were so frail that carrying even a single leaf overwhelmed the group. Picture this scene in a movie created by some big banner producer. The mighty Indra with a mountain load of wood on his shoulder, the bustling preparations for the sacrifice, the tiny sages carrying this leaf. Wouldn't such a scene be captivating not just for children but also for us? As Indra watched the stages, as, as Indra watched the sages, they accidentally fell into a pool of water. This pool was formed from the rainwater collected in the footprints left by cows on the road. The small sages, bearing the palasha leaf, plunged into the overflowing puddle, causing Indra to chuckle. But his laughter wasn't all. He ridiculed the sages and walked off, taking long strides over their heads. This angered the sages, who, though appearing frail, possessed great ascetic strength. They resolved to neutralize Indra, who had slighted and insulted them. To achieve this, they decided to conduct a separate yajna of their own. Despite their size, their chants resonated powerfully. They aimed to create a counterpart to Indra, a stronger being to stand against the tormenting Indra. Hearing their resonant mantras, Indra grew impatient and apprehensive. His confidence wavered, and he sought refuge with sage Kashyap. After recounting his story, he felt relieved. Kashyap assured him and advised him to stay put and went to meet Valkylya rishis. He soothed them with gentle words, and once they were pacified, proposed a solution to prevent the emergence of rival Indra. Recognizing Kashyap's greater virtue, the Valkylyas conceded and suggested that he handle the birth of the powerful being they had set in motion. Kashyap agreed. They decided to appoint this mighty being as the king of birds. To bring forth this being, Kashyap approached his wife Vinata and granted her a boon. She requested two sons, as we heard in the last episode, and one of them became Garuda, the king of birds, while the other was Aruna, sun's charioteer. Upon hatching, Garuda took to the skies. His immense strength and size instilled fear and reverence among the gods, leading them to bow in deference. So that is the story of how Garuda, a bird, was born to Kashyap and Vinata. Today's story extends the tale of Kadru and Vinata a bit further, but the story isn't concluded yet. Arun, who hatched prematurely due to his mother Vinata's impatience and haste, cursed her to be her sister Kadru's slave, foretelling that she would be freed from her servitude by her other son Garuda down the line. Remember this story from episode 13 of the podcast? This story tells us how impatience and haste bring about various unintended consequences. Arun's premature birth harmed him for life. This led to a curse and many other complications. The lesson here is the importance of cultivating patience. This is something I remind myself of frequently. Reflecting on this story brings to mind a well known study that you may have heard before, the one from back in 1972, conducted by a social scientist, Walter Mischel. The renowned experiment involved children and marshmallows. This experiment is famously known as the marshmallow test. During this test, 4-year-old children were given a marshmallow and informed that if they could wait alone in a room with the marshmallow for 15 minutes, they would receive 2 marshmallows afterward. About one-third of the children managed to wait, while the remaining two-thirds couldn't resist and consumed the marshmallow before the time was up. Interestingly, after about 13 or 14 years, their SAT scores were examined. The SAT is a standardized test in American schools. The children who exhibited self-control at a young age scored significantly higher on their tests as compared to the other children. There is a brief film that provides intriguing insights into this experiment, and I have provided the link below for reference. Although in 2020 some research papers have challenged Michel's findings, his research remains widely recognized. Finding support in Michel's research for lessons learned from Vinata's story is quite fascinating indeed. Recently, I came across a book titled Mind Over Monsters by psychologist Sarah Kavanagh, which delves into this subject. She revisits the marshmallow research and raises an interesting question. She sets aside the issue of self control and patience and instead ponders whether children who consume marshmallows promptly experience the world more intensely. If that's the case, what's the solution? These are thought provoking questions indeed, and Sarah Kavanagh offers an answer. Create a gap, a physical distance between us and our temptations. Her advice is to step away from the sources of temptation and not linger there. Interestingly, this aligns with the teachings found in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, but that is a whole new subject for another day. In this story, we uncovered valuable lessons and explored their relevance in our present time. Learning to be patient is often easier said than done, especially when we are young. However, stumbling and learning from our experiences isn't the only path forward. Now it's time to pause once again. What are your thoughts on today's episode and the ideas presented here? Did you come up with any new insights or notice fresh perspectives? Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know of someone who may be interested in listening to these stories, please forward the link to them. The story of Vinata and Kadru is expansive, with much more left to explore, but due to time constraints, we must halt here. Let's meet in the next episode, which will delve into how Garuda liberates his mother Vinata from slavery. Until then,